Detection, reaction, response. An idea forced upon us and a path that every single one of us has been mistakenly led down into believing that this is the answer to endpoint security. That this is the answer to preventing ransomware and malicious attacks as a whole. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Morgan. I'm a solutions engineer at ThreatLocker. And in the next 25 minutes, I'm going to try to convince you that taking a reactive approach to endpoint security is fundamentally flawed. Now, the way I like to start these presentations is by sharing some information with you. Most notably, in the last 3 years, there was an estimated $2.5 billion in ransomware payouts. Now, to make that number even worse, it's also suggested that between 60 and 70% of ransomware attacks go undisclosed, because for most businesses, there's no legal requirement for them to do so. To add to that, it's also suggested that there's an attempted ransomware attack somewhere in the world every 11 seconds. Ladies and gentlemen, make no mistake about it. We are currently in a cyber war with some of the most advanced cyber criminals the world has ever seen, with more money, more resources, now in full control of what is today a multi-billion-dollar market. So what's the issue? Why is it the case? Why is the way these guys are just constantly coming out on top of us? Now, throughout my presentation, you're going to notice a recurring theme. That theme is reaction. You see, when it comes to endpoint security, we've always taken a reactive approach. So let the bad guys go first, and then we go after. But taking a reactive approach to endpoint security has never and will never work. So let's dive into it. Now, I appreciate the fact that in attendance today, there's a wide range of technical mindsets, all the way from beginner to advanced and everything in between. But for this presentation to work, I want to strip all that back and have it so that no matter what your level of technical expertise is, you should be able to truly follow along and understand exactly what it is that we're dealing with here. To do that, we have to go back to the start and talk about where all this originated from. Now, ransomware's date all the way back to the 1980s, but I wasn't around then, so I'm going to skip forward a little bit to what was probably the first globally recognized piece of malware. So we cast our minds back to the year of 2000, when a Filipino computer science student by the name of Onel de Guzman developed what was soon to be the first globally recognized piece of malware, more commonly known as the love bug. Now, Onel was a talented coder, and he had messed around with malware before, and he still claims to this day that he never intended for this malware to end up going as widespread as it did. Now, the way Onel distributed this malware was through email in the form of an attachment. So what he did was he embedded the malware into a text file, and as it says, sent it out then. Now, for anyone that does not know what a text file is, do you know when you open the Notepad application on your computer, type in your password, save it to your desktop? That is a text file. Yes, we can see it. Please do not do that. And no, the alternative to that is not writing your password down on a sticky note and attaching it to your monitor, which I think a few of you have probably seen as well. Unbelievable. But Onel was clever. And he tactically distributed this malware out on Valentine's Day and titled the document lovelettertoyou.txt. .vbs for my techies out there. Now, what the malware was designed to do is that it would go through the clicker's contact list, attach itself to an email, send it out, and then repeat the process. And within 7 jumps, this malware had spread globally around the world and ultimately ended up causing quite a bit of damage. So, my God, what a storm that guy started. But even prior to this event, and mainly after, we move on and we start coming across viruses more frequently. And what do? Well, we come out with the antivirus, right? We move on and we start getting new forms of malware like Trojans, rootkits, worms, and what do? Well, we come out with next-gen antivirus, started introducing AI. We fast forward to today, and we have the worst of all, ransomwares. And what do? Well, we come out with what is probably the most popular tool on the market today, EDR, endpoint detection and response. So, you notice the passion there, right? We let the bad guys go first, and then we go after. And when it comes to how these AVs and EDRs operate, it's no different. You see, the problem with these tools is that they'll allow you to install the malicious software and then decide if it's good or bad. But the problem with that is that there's millions and millions of new pieces of malware being produced every single week, meaning I would argue, and the data will back me up here, to suggest it's impossible to know about every piece of malware out there. And if these tools were as good as they say they are, why is it that if we Google ransomware attack in the news, we're seeing new attacks week in, week out. Because taking a reactive approach to endpoint security has never and will never work. Now, ransomwares. Let's talk about them. But before we can know what a ransomware is, we need to first of all understand how encryption works. Now, encryption is a term that many of you are probably familiar with, some more than others. And while yes, encryption goes into a lot of detail, we're going to focus on one area in particular today, messaging encryption. Now, at a very high level overview, encryption is the process of using a very advanced algorithm to transform plain text English, which we can all read and understand, into what we call ciphertext, making it completely ineligible. Now, let's say, for example, you use an application on your phone that provides encryption services like WhatsApp, for example. The way that works is that everybody has two keys. The first key you have is your public key. Now, every single person that you message has a copy of your public key. So when they go to send you a message, they use your public key to lock/encrypt it and send it to you. So that as the message is transferring, it's in that encrypted state. And why do we do this? Well, we do this to prevent what we call man-in-the-middle attacks. So if someone were to intercept the message and reveal the content, if it's encrypted, it's in ciphertext, a bunch of random numbers, letters, characters. It would take a supercomputer a very long time to crack that algorithm and reverse it back. But if you're not using encryption, again, the attacker can intercept it and read the message as plain text. Now, the second key that everybody has is your private key. Now, you are the only person in the world that has access to that private key. So when you receive the message that's encrypted by your public key, you then use the private key to then decrypt the message, reversing it from ciphertext back into plain text, which you can then all understand. So to recap, two keys, public key to encrypt, private key to decrypt. So now that we know how encryption works, let's talk about ransomwares. Ransomwares are just software. They're built using the exact same code as our everyday applications. The only difference is the intent in what they do after they execute. So think about the likes of Outlook, Adobe, Excel, all those applications we use on a day-to-day basis. They are built using the exact same code as ransomwares. As I said, the only difference is the intent in what they do after they execute. Now, for those of you that are unaware, a ransomware is a form of malicious software that when it executes, it encrypts your data and then demands a ransom payment to release it back to you. So think about it like this. Using our newfound knowledge, when the hacker executes the ransomware and encrypts all your data with the public key, what is the only key in the world that can now decrypt the files and release it back to you? If you're thinking to yourself, the hacker's private key, you're absolutely correct. Now, in this case, look, we refer to it as a decryptor key. So again, you encrypt and then decrypt after. These ransomwares are crippling businesses left, right, and center. They're absolutely rampant at the moment. It is unbelievably true in what they say. It's not a case of if you get hit with an attack. It is a case of when. Everybody has a target on their back. Look, I absolutely love what I do for a living. I truly do. But a very tough part about my job is meeting with prospects and people that work in the industry who have recently experienced a breach. And sometimes these people have built companies over 20, 30-year periods. Someone clicked a link in an email and either destroyed or nearly destroyed everything. Because that's all it takes. One wrong click, one wrong move, and you can experience a ransomware. So, with that being said, what do we do? How do we take back control and start getting the upper hand on these guys? Well, we need to go back to the drawing board, rethink the strategy, rethink the approach, because the current way isn't working. But what if there's a way in that instead of allowing the malicious software to execute and then decide if it's good or bad, we just blocked it by default? But not only ransomwares, what if we just blocked everything by default and assumed that everything's dangerous? Well, this is where I introduce to you ThreatLocker. You see, ThreatLocker is a zero-trust endpoint security solution. Now, at the core of what we do is application allowlisting with a default deny approach. So the goal of this is to get an approved list of software and then deny everything else by default, including ransomware, malware, viruses, and so on. Now, allowlisting has always been a great concept, but not necessarily a new one. You see, the problem with allowlisting, though, is that it's always been a permit the application by hash approach. Now, that's all well and good, but the problem with that is that hashes of applications change very frequently. Not only that, when it comes to building out the allow list, you have to build it out application by application, hash by hash, which just took forever and really left a bad taste in everybody's mouth about allow listing. But we changed it here at ThreatLocker, and we've automated the process for you. You see, when we deploy ThreatLocker, we push an agent to each of your devices. And when those agents first go out, they start out in what we call learning mode. Now, what learning mode is doing is it's scanning the baseline of each machine. monitoring and cataloging everything that it finds currently running in your environment already. So, anything from Windows core files, drivers, recovery files, applications. We're learning everything and building out that application allow list for you. That way you don't have to. Now, after about a 7 to 10 day period, we'll have learned out about 95% of your environment. So that's the first part. We're going to learn all the applications, and some of you might be thinking, well, Morgan, that's great. You're going to learn my environment as it is during that particular week, but what happens next week when half my software decides to update? Which is a really good point, because again, when it came to how the allow listing functions, if you're using a hash-based approach to allow listing and a user gets an application updated, they go to run it, it gets blocked, the user then has to let the IT team know, they have to extract the hashes, upload it, deploy it out, which just calls for a terrible end user experience and a very frustrating admin experience. But this is where ThreatLocker separates itself from everybody else. You see, internally at ThreatLocker, our largest department is our 24/7 applications team. Now what they do is they manage over 15,000 applications, which we refer to as built-ins. Now what that means is that whenever a patch Tuesday comes along or an update gets released by any of those 15,000 applications, our apps team will extract the hashes on your behalf, upload them to the policy for you. That way when you go to push your remote patches or installations or updates, ThreatLocker will not block you because our apps team are already managing the policies for you. So I think when I started using ThreatLocker, there was 200 built-ins, and it was brilliant then. Now there's 15,000 and actively growing, meaning allow listing is getting easier and easier to do by the day. So look, without going too much into detail, once we've done the learning mode, we run simulations so we can see what would have been blocked, how we've been in secure mode, and then we enforce the allow list. That means if anybody tries to execute or install any software, if that's a ransomware, virus, spyware, even trusted software, that we do not have a policy for on our allow list, we will step in and block it. And that's really the difference. Okay, we're going to take that kind of guilty until proven innocent approach, whereas other tools might take that innocent until proven guilty approach. And that ultimately can be the difference. So that's the first part. That's great. We're going to block our ransomwares by default. But some of you might be thinking, well, Morgan, what about those more common attacks we have nowadays, the more advanced ones, the 0 days, the flawless malwares, the living off the land attacks? How do we stop them? And it's a really good question, because what we have to remember is that as operating systems evolve, as they advance, as they develop, as we have more software available to us today than ever before, what we have to remember is that every single piece of software installed in your environment is a backdoor that hackers can leverage to gain access to the environment. Because think about it. Not only can all your applications talk to all the other applications, they can access your files, they can access the registry, and they can also call out to any website they want to. So how do we stop it? Well, think about someone clicking on a phishing link in an email, okay? Sometimes what can happen when you click a phishing link, now look, if you work in the industry, I think we can all agree on the fact that, well, yes, sometimes we might occasionally see some pretty well-crafted phishing emails. For the most part, they're pretty ridiculous. You know, the free iPhones, the free Amazon gift vouchers, the princess promising you millions of dollars. I think we can all safely say we know somebody in the office that would fall for one of them. And if you're sitting there thinking, hang on a second, I don't know anyone like that. But think about it, right? When someone clicks a phishing link in an email, sometimes what can happen is that Outlook will tend to call PowerShell. PowerShell calls the web browser, goes out to the hacker server, downloads the payload, then executes it, right? So how do we stop it? Well, this is where I'm going to introduce to you ThreatLocker's second component, our trademark technology application ringfencing. Now, ringfencing sits alongside allow listing. And what it does is it puts controls around applications once you've allowed them to run in the environment. So what we do is we basically block application interaction. We block file access, we block registry access, we block network access. So in that theoretical based example I gave you there, we would have blocked that. Because what we do is we want to allow Office to run, all of Outlook, Word, Excel, PowerPoint. They can run no problem. But when those applications are functioning, we don't want them to be able to call out to the likes of Command Prompt, PowerShell, curl, run DLL. These applications are needed to run in the environment, but under no circumstances should Word ever be able to call PowerShell because it doesn't need to do so. So why do we let it? Now that was a theoretical based attack. Let's talk about a real attack that ringfencing prevented. The Microsoft Felina attack from a few years ago. For anyone that's unfamiliar, the Microsoft Felina attack, the way it worked was that a user would receive an email with an Office extension, with a legitimate Office extension, a .docx or a .xlsx, I always get that wrong, XLSX extension. Now what would happen is the user would download and open the file, And straight away, the Windows troubleshooter would launch. Now, from a user point of view, it could look pretty standard. But I don't know about you guys, I have never seen the Windows troubleshooter fix anything, like ever in my life, so unbelievable. But again, from a user point of view, pretty standard. Now, what was happening in the background is that Word had spawned a hidden PowerShell process to go into the user's file explorer, take all the data, and send it back to the hacker server. And by the time IT had gotten around to realize it, the damage was done, it was too late. But ring-fencing would have blocked it on multiple levels. Because first of all, Word would not have been able to call PowerShell. Secondly, while yes, we're kind of talking about these kind of quote-unquote high-risk applications, they need to run in the environment. And we let them run in the environment. But we up the restrictions with them. So we let PowerShell run, but we also say PowerShell can't access your files or call out to any unknown websites unless you have an explicit exclusion in place. So this is really how we control against the likes of zero-day, fileless malware, and living off the land attacks, because when malware is in your environment, it has to be able to call upon existing applications to help carry out and execute the attack. Whether it's going laterally across the network, harvesting credentials, locating where your files are to encrypt them, making that communication back to the command and control center. When everything's ring-fenced, we're effectively blocking the ransomware from executing. There's a few slides showing the ring-fencing, kind of how it looks like in the policy. So you can see there, for example, yes, we're letting Office run, but Office can't communicate with those applications. Again, all built-ins, all ready to go. So look, guys, honestly, I think allowlisting has to be the only way forward. It truly does. Because knowing that nothing can execute in your environment without your approval is priceless. And it will help you sleep better at night. Look, I think one thing for certain is when you solely rely on a detection-based tool, you're taking a gamble. You're gambling on the hopes that a third-party software company knows about every single piece of malware that could potentially try to execute in your environment at any given stage. But remember, when you're gambling, the house always wins. Take back control. Implement an allowlisting today. I promise you won't regret it. Now, for the first time, one of these presentations, I'm going to dedicate these next slides to my good friend Regan, who asked me to go through some of these guys. So, look, ThreatLocker, shout out Regan. Look, we're not just an allowlisting solution. We also offer so much more, okay? DAC, this is a great one to start with because it's free, stands for Defense Against Configuration. I assume that your clients have multiple levels of compliance they have to adhere to. DAC basically scans your environment and looks for misconfigurations. So for example, if BitLocker is not enabled in your C drive, it will flag. It will pinpoint the exact machines that do not have BitLocker enabled in the C drive. But not only that, we're going to also show you, is RDP exposed on the endpoint? If it is, it will flag it. Are the SMB ports protected? If they're not, it'll flag it. We also flag certain applications that we think that you should block by default. Think about MSHTA. MSHTA is a native Windows application built into the system. Hackers absolutely adore this application, okay? Because what they do with it is they move laterally across the network. They upload and download malware with it. They also use it to communicate back to command and control centers. When you install a blank Windows operating system, that application is allowed to run by default. Very quick wins, be able to block these applications. In our latest agent, I believe there's over 220 checks, all ranging from critical to high risk, moderate risk, low risk as well, and the passes, of course. Now, my favorite is up next. Elevation control. So, elevation control is basically an application product we use to effectively bypass the UAC on a machine. I can say firsthand because I worked for an MSP for years growing up. One thing about my job that was quite tedious, I wouldn't say it's a problem as such, more tedious, is those application install tickets, okay, application update tickets, because unless you're pushing patches for every piece of software out there and you have a situation whereby your users log in with low privileged user accounts, when it comes to launching these applications, they have to log a ticket with IT, wait for IT to connect in with their credentials and install the software. But it's never just an application install ticket, is it? There's always something wrong with the printer. I always found I ran into that. Always the printers, isn't it? And printers have a mind of their own. So yeah, but the way elevation control works is that we assign the elevation to certain policies, allowing you to bypass the UAC requirement on it. This can be really useful for applications that not only require an admin account to be launched. Think about the dental applications, the medical applications. What we find is a lot of them require admin access to launch in the first place. So don't give out a high privileged account, assign elevation to the policy, and we can bypass the UAC on it. The really nice thing about those built-ins I mentioned earlier is they're going to contain the installer, the updater, and the uninstaller files, making it really, really easy to assign elevation. We can also elevate the entire device as well, and also look out for any unwanted admin credentials lying around on the device. Storage control, massively underrated feature here at ThreatLocker. Probably, I would say, our easiest component to build. Storage control, the way it works is that, yes, we can't block every single application. We have to let X amount of applications run in the environment, right? But you might have a situation whereby you got on-prem file shares that have really highly sensitive HR data or financial data in Excel files or Word files or whatever the case may be. So yes, you might have, let's say, a list of 200 permitted applications to run in the environment, but when it comes to those Word files, the only application that should be allowed to open those Word files is Word. So what we do is we learn the behavior of which applications are talking to certain files, click a button to auto-populate it, it builds the list for us automatically, and then we lock it down. So we say, okay, Adobe can open your PDF files. We can say Word can open the Word files. Excel can open the Excel files. The really nice thing about this component is that it's always on. Okay, so whether you're in learning mode, monitor mode, secure mode, it is always enforced. So yes, we're going to block all ransomwares by default, but let's say, for example, you permitted one to run by accident or left machine in learning mode, the silver lining is your data is always protected at all times. We also track all your data movements as well. So any financial firms out there, banks, hospitals that have to keep track of their data records, again, we keep all that tracked in our unified audit. I asked Martin to take the slide out. Patch management, yeah, we have it. It's a great solution, but I think a lot of you guys can achieve that through your RMM tools. So look, we have it there. Windows patching just went live as well, which is great. About 300-ish third-party applications you can currently patch, I believe. So the nice thing about how our patch manager works as well is that what some patch tools will do is they'll look at AppWiz, your programs and features page, and look for the version number there. The way our one works is that because we have visibility into every single hash that executes in the environment, we look for deprecated hashes. So if you're running an outdated version of an application, our system knows exactly what it is and is immediately going to push down the next patch to you to keep you up to date. Web control. So one thing I found was that when I worked for an MSP years ago was that we used to take over certain customers that weren't necessarily in a position to buy a next-gen firewall of the highest standard, but they still needed content filtering. Also found a DNS filter could be maybe too aggressive for them. This web control is really nice. It basically blocks certain categories, all the ones you would think of: gambling websites, gaming, malicious website, explicit content. We also recently added 30 days, 60 days, and 90 days recently registered domains to their list there. Okay, so the nice thing with our one is that it's all done to the agent. So no matter what network they're connected to, they could be in the office, they could be using a hotspot. God forbid they connect to an airport Wi-Fi. Again, our web control will still be functioning because it's active everywhere and it will block them every single time. Also, the good thing as well is they can request access to websites as well. It'll pop up in their web browser to say you do not have access to it, but you can put in a request and our IT administrators can review it after. Now, the big one. Zero Trust Network Access. So, this is our latest and greatest component we've released. Now, I would easily say that, look, this is probably the biggest thing we've released since allowlisting. Now, by show of hands in attendance today, who here has customers that use some sort of a VPN to connect back to internal infrastructure? Okay, a lot of you, yeah. That was my loaded question of the day. Now, the VPNs, look, I think we can all agree they were fantastic technology when they first came out. Okay, they were brilliant. Lately, I think what we're seeing a lot of lately is vulnerabilities with them. You know, bad patching, misconfigurations, exploits kind of exposing them. Ultimately, again, it is an extra application on a laptop. It's an extra set of credentials potentially, right? So, what we decided was, look, okay, what's really the main purpose of a VPN? Well, a VPN is really kind of used for two things: to deliver access back to SMB file shares, and also to give some RDP access in certain regard, okay? So what we do is we come out with Zero Trust Network Access. And then what we do is, instead of tunneling all the services, all the traffic through your VPN, we pick certain things we want to put through it. Now, the way it works is you can kind of see a bit of a triangle on the side there. So on one side, you've got your agent, okay? Next part is the broker sitting in the cloud. We got multiple brokers sitting across the United States. We got ones in Australia, the UK, and all over Europe. Okay, more brokers along the way as well. Now what the agent will do is the agent will submit a handshake to the broker. The broker will verify that you are a member of the correct source group, and it will then deliver you access to the file server, for example, if you're going to be going for SMB file shares. From a user point of view, how does it look? Well, it looks like magic. It looks like they're inside the network at all times. No need to log on to a VPN anymore, no more credentials. It can also be used for RDP access as well. So I know some cases people like to use laptops to connect back into their internal resources, okay? But again, by shutting off that kind of exposed access, think about it like this: remote encryption, something we're seeing a lot of lately. That's all gone. Because again, unless you've got an agent on the device, you can't access anything. We always talk about kind of the fact that like so many different devices now have to have a network connection. Seeing Hoovers and our vacuums and kettles and ovens and all, everything has a network connection right now. So again, we don't want to leave those things exposed to our network, okay? I know they might be on a separate VLAN or whatever, but again, the idea here is that we only want devices with trusted agents being able to access our resources, and that's how we shut it down. Now, some of you might think, well, that's great, but we also have clients that use SharePoint and OneDrive, and we're all very advanced now. It's great, we got you covered still. Zero Trust Cloud Access works alongside Zero Trust Network Access. Similar concept, similar broker concept, but this is about controlling access to third-party SaaS applications. Now, it's not just Microsoft as well, it's everything. Your RMM tool, your holy grail. The RMM tool that has access to everything, all your endpoints, has access to deploy scripts, deploy applications. Okay, what we're going to do is use Zero Trust Cloud Access to basically set conditional access policies from our broker's IP address and only allow access from certain agents. Okay, so unless you have an agent installed and you're coming through our broker service, it's not going to allow you to connect in. Think about a user getting phished, okay, or token theft, okay, and they get duped into going to a fake Microsoft 365 credential site, and they type in their credentials. Yes, the attacker may have your credentials, but they're absolutely useless to them, because unless they're sat at the device itself going through our broker server, they can't access anything. So again, any third-party SaaS website that can accept a conditional access login, we can protect now with ZTCA. There is also a mobile application as well for iOS and Android devices. So if you have clients that use this to control access to Teams and Outlook and whatnot, again, we can also set that up to limit access based on conditional access and kind of geographical restrictions. So look, again, there's so many different components now. We've got a fully managed MDR service as well. I think, look, ultimately, again, really what it comes back to is the core of what we do is application allow listing. Okay? Again, as I said, allow listing is and has to be the only way forward. As I said, knowing that nothing can execute in your environment without your say-so or your approval is priceless. So ladies and gentlemen, I am drawing towards a conclusion of my presentation. I just want to say thank you so much for your time. It's very much appreciated. I hope you've thoroughly enjoyed it, potentially even learned something new here today. But before I go, I want to leave you with one thing. At the very start of my presentation, I said to you all that we are currently in a cyber war with some of the most advanced cyber criminals the world has ever seen. More money, more resources, now in full control of what is today a multi-billion-dollar market. But I truly believe that with cutting-edge security solutions like ThreatLocker, that we are slowly but surely winning. Thank you.